Hi, this is Last Man Thinking, where we discuss geopolitics and history from all over the world. Today we're going to be conducting a thought exercise. 4 countries that you don't expect to be global superpowers in the future. Now, before we get started, we have a few disclaimers. One, no one can predict the future, obviously. The vagrancies of reality, of the ups and downs of international relationships, of black swan events, stuff like that. But as a thought exercise, we thought we would look at 4 countries that aren't really talked about much when we talk about future global superpowers. Secondly, we are not talking about a hyperpower like Britain at its height or the United States in the 1990s. We're talking about large, great powers that are able to influence their own area as well as provide a force multiplying or related sort of influence amongst the international community. So think of a Russia or a France or something. Thirdly, we are an unbiased channel. We are not endorsing any country or any nation. We are simply looking at the macro trends that we see going around. And we've picked 4 countries that we think not many people think of when they think of global future superpowers. To go through this in a slightly structured manner, we thought maybe we should come up with some sort of ranking system. So we are going to be judging them on a few factors each. One is capability, your military capability, your economic capability, your demographics, your geopolitical abilities. The other is context, so where you are in the world, who your neighbors are, what your current international position is, how you're placed in that sense. And finally, motivation. Do you have the motivation? Do you, your people, your society, do you have the motivation? Do you have the reasons for wanting to become a great power? And we'll be ranking each of these measures out of 2. And we just added one more point, which is the X factor, right? You get 1 point for the X factor. You get 1 point or you don't get that point or whatever. This is something that is unique to each of these countries. So we'll be ranking each country out of 7, and based on these things, based on CC, M, and X. So let's get started without further ado. Number 4, Algeria. Now, most laymen wouldn't be able to find Algeria on a map if you ask them to. And as soon as a country in Africa is mentioned, people's perception is, oh, none of these are ever going to ever be anything apart from basket cases. But Africa is a massive continent, and it has more than 50 countries, 54 at the last count. And not all of them are exactly like each other. There's a massive amount of diversity within Africa. And if we keep our biases and our prejudices and our perceptions aside, we can see some rather interesting things developing within that continent. So, Algeria. Let's take a look at Algeria from its capabilities. Algeria is the 10th largest country in the world, the largest country in Africa by area. It has a large number of natural resources, especially oil and natural gas, which it exports to Europe, amongst others. Its state-owned oil and gas company is the largest corporation in Africa. Algeria was a Soviet-aligned country back in the day, but it has now moved away from that in many important respects, even though they have a very, very healthy defense relationship with Russia. They are, if not the largest, then amongst the largest militaries in the continent of Africa. They have a very respectable defense budget, even by international standards. Something like $26 billion in 2026 has been earmarked for Algerian defense. And they are a very capable nation, both militarily and economically, especially in terms of potential. They have a large demographic base. They have 47 million people or something of the sort. And they have a large military, a very well-equipped military, especially by African standards. And so within the capability, Algeria has the potential to become a large economy, providing Europe with gas, providing other people with other natural resources, especially as Europe tries to move away from Russia. They have a very capable air force, they have a capable armed forces, they have about 150,000 people in their armed forces. They can probably inject some more if they wish to. And all in all, Algeria, though, like I mentioned, most lay people couldn't find it on a map, is a potential great power, especially given its contexts, which we will talk about now. Algeria lies within a very volatile geopolitical situation at the moment, region. To its east is Libya, undergoing a civil war. To its south is the Sahel nations, which are again going through deep political and geopolitical turmoil. And to its west lies its main rival, Morocco, which has been cozying up to Israel and the United States to try and bolster its position. In response, as already mentioned, Algeria has built one of the strongest militaries in the world. So, in terms of this context, Algeria has many avenues to expand its influence, to interfere in other people's affairs, to make itself a part of the geopolitical situation around it. So again, looking at Algeria's geopolitical context, there is an opportunity for Algeria to advance itself within the area that it is and become a greater power than it is what it is right now. Now let's talk about motivation. Algeria, like I said, historically was aligned to the Soviet Union. It was anti-colonial because they had fought a bloody rebellion against the French. Since that day, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Algeria experienced a decade-long civil war and surprisingly managed to get the support of the West, get the support of Europe to fight its jihadist sort of opponents. And this was a rarity back in the day before the American war on terror started. You know, when the Mujahideen were brave warriors representing their countries, fighting against oppression and things like that. It is at that point in time, between 1992 and 2002, that Algeria managed to sort out its internal problems. And it has a historical dispute with Morocco based on Morocco's claim on the Western Sahara, which of course certain developments have taken place at the moment, with America recognizing Morocco's claim to the Western Sahara in exchange for Morocco accepting the existence of Israel. So Algeria does have a certain motivation to expand its influence, to strengthen its position within its geopolitical context. And of course, like any other country, it has a motivation to grow its economy. And a more stable situation around Algeria will only benefit it. So it does have a stake in making the area work. So if we were to rate Algeria on these measures, how would we do that? So let's say capability, we could give Algeria a 1.5 out of 2. This is mainly because Algeria is nowhere close to the ultimate holy grail of military power, which is nuclear weapons, and finding itself in somewhat opposed to the United States because of the United States position on Morocco. It does not seem that the international community is going to be very conducive to a nuclear Algeria. So even though it has the largest military in Africa and quite a capable military, they have just allegedly, apparently ordered the Su-57, fifth generation fighter from Russia. According to some reports, they have received some Su-57s. This would make Algeria one of the few nations in the so-called third world to operate a fifth generation fighter before greater nations that are always talked about as future superpowers like Brazil or India or the like. But despite all this, it doesn't seem very close to nuclear weapons, so we'll give it a 1.5 out of 2 in capability. In the context of where Algeria lies right now, there are opportunities all around. Algeria seems to be able to walk the tightrope of its geopolitical area. So I think in context, we'll give it 1.5 out of 2. And as far as motivation is concerned, well, again, Algeria does have a motivation to expand, to stabilize its surrounding, to stabilize its neighborhood, and become a greater power than it is today. Though it does seem like it's playing the safe bet. It doesn't want to rock the boat. It doesn't want to become a Libya 2.0, for example, or it doesn't want to become a Morocco, a vassal state to some Western power. So it's walking this tightrope. So maybe in motivation, we give it 1.25 out of 2. And now we come to that X factor. And here Algeria faces a bit of a problem, though the majority of its citizens are Arab. It does have a Berber minority. There are ethnic tensions within it. There are religious tensions within it. Certain people within Algeria feel that there should be a more Islamic state. And of course, it has its fundamentalists. Then you have others who believe in the pan-Arabic sort of socialist or proto-socialist or pseudo-socialist identity, which is what officially Algeria is. And so there are these tensions within Algeria, which it has, though it has navigated them successfully in the decade-long civil war that it faced at the beginning of the post-Soviet era. These tensions still exist within Algerian society and Algerian polity. And so for that, I think within that X category, rather than giving it some points, we have to take a few away. So out of that 1, we'll take 0.5 points away from that. So that gives Algeria a grand total of 3.75 out of 7. Not bad considering, like I said, most people can't find it on the map. Number 3, Switzerland. Now again, when I mentioned Switzerland as a future global superpower, most people would say, what is he talking about, right? Switzerland has been so attuned to its neutrality and has portrayed an image of a peaceful nation for so many years. I mean, right after the fall of Napoleon and then through the 1848 rebellions in Europe, Switzerland has essentially been Switzerland, and it has exuded this neutrality through the most turbulent times in human history, especially in European history. Both the world wars, it was neutral. And looking at Switzerland, one would say that this seems a strange country to be bringing up in the context of what we are talking about. But if one looks closely, Switzerland is an extremely capable nation. Let's start with its capability in the military. Switzerland has a large military. Many people don't understand this. A very well-trained military. Switzerland has conscription. Millions of people go through its military system, and it has a large pool of reservists. It has a very planned defense strategy. Switzerland used to, they might still do, but they claim they don't, but they used to have the ability to shut down Switzerland. They could blow up all the tunnels leading into Switzerland. They could shut down all the passes. Even today, many tourists are surprised to find when they trek into the height of the Swiss Alps, they'll see some pretty little cottage sitting somewhere, and then when they open the doors, there'll be an anti-tank gun within it. It's a very well-prepared country. It has almost 9 million people and an armed force of almost 150,000. And it has many, many more thousands of reservists who are well prepared and motivated to defend Switzerland. Switzerland is technologically an advanced country. It is able to create high-end military technology, especially if it's put under pressure and it wants to. In the past it has. Switzerland has produced some superlative aircraft designs during the World War eras, and they've had programs constantly researching and trying to produce these aircraft and other advanced military systems throughout the years, quietly behind the facade of them being this peaceful, neutral nation who is never going to fight ever. The Swiss have been preparing to fight. And if one looks at Switzerland's history, it has been a huge military power in the past. There's a reason why the Pope has a Swiss papal guard and not a Roman papal guard or a French papal guard. It's because back in the day, the Swiss were the best fighters in the world, at least in Europe. They produced mercenaries of the highest quality. They went and fought all over Europe for all the kingdoms in Europe. And as force multipliers, they remain unmatched in late medieval European history and early modern European history. There were Swiss volunteers in the Second World War on both sides. And Swiss aircraft shot down both Allied and Axis aircraft during the Second World War that strayed into Switzerland's area. Not many people know that the Swiss also had a very well developed and a very advanced nuclear weapons program. And they managed to reach a stage where after a few months they would have come up with a nuclear weapon, but then they made a political decision to freeze their nuclear weapons program at that point, because the fallout of having a nuclear weapon would be far greater than any advantage that a nuclear weapon would have given at that time. However, if tomorrow there is a need, Switzerland can very easily, in a few months perhaps, get a nuclear weapon, and its industry can also develop ballistic missiles, things like that, which will help deliver that nuclear weapon. They also buy the best military equipment in the world. When they're not making their own, they've placed an order for F-35s. They've very capable air force, very capable armed forces, and they are very capable of defending themselves. They could also, in a hypothetical future where deployment is required outside of Switzerland, they could deploy small forces, highly technologically advanced forces, well-trained forces, to act as force multipliers outside of Switzerland. So from the military point of view, Switzerland is far more capable than most people give it credit for. When we come to the economy, Switzerland is a great economy, especially for a country of its size. Though it does have 9 million people, it's a small country by area, but it has a large economy. Its centrality to banking must be well known by anybody who understands anything about Switzerland. And again, like I said, it is home to many high-tech industries. It's home to aircraft manufacturing. It's home to high-end luxury goods. It's home to a lot of other things that would make a larger country proud. And so, keeping all of this in mind together, Switzerland is quite a capable nation when it comes to its capability. It doesn't yet have nuclear weapons, so we'll have to take some points away for that. So, out of 2 in capability, we would rank Switzerland as probably a 1.5. Now, let's talk about the context. So Switzerland is situated in the middle of one of the most stable regions on the planet, geopolitically speaking, Europe. It does not seem that there are any opportunities for Switzerland to expand, or there are any reasons for Switzerland to want to export its capabilities or utilize its capabilities to get something. But however, in a hypothetical situation where we do see tensions rising within Europe, there is of course the Russia-Ukraine war. That's a little far away from Switzerland, but there are other tensions around. There are the massive migrant crises which Italy seems to be facing. There is a political churn going on within the rest of Europe, where you might have situations where a stable Switzerland with a very capable armed force and a large economy could put its foot forward and get some brownie points for itself. However, at the moment, the context is very stable, so it does not look like Switzerland has too many places to expand. In the context sphere, we'll have to give it a 1 out of a 2. Thirdly, let's look at motivation. How motivated are the Swiss to create a greater Switzerland? And here we find that the Swiss are pretty happy with the way their country is. There really doesn't seem to be any sort of great motivation to expand, to become a greater power or anything of the sort. I am sure everybody wants their economy to grow. The Swiss franc is one of the strongest currencies in the world, and I'm sure they would want it to do better. So from that point of view, they do have some motivation to maintain their high development index. They have some motivation to do that, but they don't really have too much of motivation. You don't see a lot of motivation within Swiss society to expand, to become a greater power in terms of becoming a superpower. However, they are very capable of it. They have in the past gone outside of Switzerland and influenced the world around them in very, very important ways. And so in motivation, we'd have to give them a 1 out of a 2. Now we come to the X factor. And here we find the Swiss are a disciplined people. They are highly organized. If push comes to shove, they are capable of acting like a nation. They are one of the oldest nations in the world, one of the oldest polities in the world. According to some estimates, their nation goes back to the 1200s. According to others, is of course slightly more recent. The modern form of Switzerland is probably from 1848, 1850. They have maintained a consistency with their neutrality as well as their defense preparedness and their economy. And so that gives them a certain ability, if required, to act decisively. And therefore, in this X factor sphere, we'll give them a 0.5. That gives Switzerland a grand total of 4 out of 7. Now we come to number 2, Israel. Again, like I mentioned in the disclaimers, we are not supportive or unsupportive of a certain nation. We are simply looking at the macro trends. So let's look at Israel's capabilities. I don't think any introduction is required to the Israeli military forces or its military capabilities. They are an extremely capable military nation. They have fought multiple wars against opponents that on paper are far stronger than them. They are also about 9 million people. They also have conscription. Like Switzerland, the difference is that their conscripts are very frequently thrown into very hot action and they have a great amount of experience. They have a large number of reservists. And of course, the open secret is that Israel has nuclear weapons, the only state in the Middle East to have nuclear weapons. And there really isn't any doubt about Israel's military capability. Those who would doubt it probably have some bias or some prejudice against Israel to not acknowledge how well the Israelis have done militarily over the last 50, 60, 70 years. If we look at the Israeli economy is not a small economy. It's one of the largest economies in the Middle East. It's a very high-tech economy. It produces a lot of its military equipment. It produces high-end technology otherwise, whether it's software or hardware. It's one of the leaders in arid irrigation and farming agriculture in the world. And it was one of the pioneers of drone warfare. In all these places, Israel can get more weight to bear than one would expect of a small country, a small nation like Israel. So within this capability sphere, again, looking at the demographics, Israel, like I said, has 9 million people, but it is one of the few nations which could be called developed, which has a positive growth rate. So Israel has about 3.1 children per woman. And that is a growth rate that you don't really find in developed nations. And so from a demographic point of view also, Israel is doing all right. So in the capability sphere, if you were supposed to award points to Israel, I think out of 2, we'd have to give it a 2. So 2 out of 2 for Israel in capability. Now let's look at the context. Israel is, of course, in smack bang in the middle of one of the most volatile geopolitical situations on the planet. Many would say because of Israel the situation is so volatile, but that is a discussion for maybe another episode. However, the fact remains that there are opportunities galore for Israel to expand, and Israel has historically ebbed and waned. It has expanded. It doesn't have a problem expanding, taking over other bits of land, and finding a historical basis for ownership for them. Israel has been perfectly capable of doing that. In the past, they've done that with the Sinai, they've done that. Some would say they're doing that right now with Gaza and the West Bank. And there are nut jobs in the Israeli government at the moment who claim they are working for a greater Israel and all that stuff. So there is, within the context of where Israel lies and given its capabilities, it is a very favorable area for Israel to expand. Recently, after the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's government in Syria, Israel decided that the Druze in southern Syria were its responsibility. They've created a sort of semi-vassal state within the Druze. Israel has historically supported the Kurds. They've just recognized Somaliland as an independent nation. And so Israel is capable of expanding, and therefore within the context sphere, we'll also have to give Israel 2 out of 2. Now we come to motivation. Do Israelis have the motivation to expand? And here again, we have to say that yes, they do. Israel has constantly been fighting adversaries, whether they are Arab Baathists or there are Islamic fundamentalists who want to wipe Israel off the map. And it is, in the beginning, it had such a precarious geopolitical position that the one surefire way of making sure that your country was not gobbled up was by expanding. And this motivation still remains. Israel would love to get southern Lebanon, would love to expand in southern Syria, would love to go on the other bank of the Jordan River. Israeli society seems to have a drive to expand. So again, the motivation does exist within Israeli society, within Israeli polity, within the Israeli military. And like I said in the context bit, the opportunities exist. So again, in motivation, we'll have to give Israel 2 out of 2. So that gives it 6 with these 3 factors. Now let's get to the X factor for Israel. Now this is a little bit more complicated. You see, Israel officially is a state for Jewish people. It's what some would call an ethno-chauvinistic or a religio-chauvinistic state, where they believe it's the homeland of the Jews and it's a state meant, even though they have Arab citizens and they have, like I mentioned, the Druze. But this construction makes Israel face a lot of hostility across its region. And any sort of expansion creates a problem for Israel in this matter. A very recent example that I can give is the capture of southern Yemen by the UAE's proxy, the STC, very recently was based on the fact that they would recreate South Yemen. The struggle between Saudi Arabia and the UAE over Yemen is for another episode, but very briefly, this faction captured a large portion of southern Yemen and reportedly were planning to declare it as a separate nation. And the ploy that they deployed was that they would recognize the state of Israel, and in return, America and the powers that be would recognize them as a sovereign nation. The problem with that was that this plan was deeply unpopular within Yemen itself, as it is throughout the Middle East when it comes to recognition of Israel. And when the Saudi Arabian proxies and the Saudi Air Force and everybody rolled back the STC in South Yemen, they were able to get the tribes in the area and all that stuff to ally with them very, very easily, because recognition of Israel is very, very unpopular on the Arab main street. And this is a problem that Israel will face no matter where it expands within its area. It will face unrelenting hostility, like it did in the past when it took over, let's say, the Sinai and all, and it will face unrelenting hostility because of its very character. And so if the Israeli state cannot modify or change that character, some might say that fundamental character, then that will be a huge problem for Israel and a huge obstacle on its way to creating a greater Israel. And so in that X factor, we have to give it a -1. So that gives Israel a total of 5 out of 7. Number 1, Japan. Japan, when we look at it, many people would say, I mean, it's been a pacifist nation for so many decades, since the end of the Second World War. They really don't seem to have any motivation to expand, and they are known for other things. They're known for high technology, they're known for high culture and things like that. And so Japan might not be so expected when you think about future global superpowers. However, let's look at it through the criteria that we have set for all the others. So when we get to capability, Japan has a very, very capable military. Japan has slowly reached a state where its military is amongst the most capable in East Asia. Certainly, they can produce high-end military equipment. They can produce aircraft, they can produce missiles, they can produce massive ships. They're now the proud possessors of aircraft carriers in all but name. They call them helicopter carriers, but essentially right from the beginning it's very obvious that they meant them to be operating the F-35B. They do operate high-end American equipment, again, which they can produce on their own if they so choose. They are one of the largest economies in the world for decades, for literally well over 60 years. And I don't think Japan's high technology credentials need to be justified here. They are pretty obvious to anybody with even half an eye open. When it comes to nuclear weapons, again, Japan has a large civilian nuclear program, and according to most analysts, in a few months, most analysts call Japan a screwdriver turn away from a nuclear bomb. I mean, turn a few nuts and they have a nuclear bomb. And it is pretty obvious that if the Japanese wanted to, despite the fact that they are the only nation that has ever been bombed by nuclear bombs, if they wanted to, if they needed to, they could come up with nuclear bombs very, very quickly. And like I mentioned, their economy is great. Let's look at their demographics. Again, most of the commentators in the world would say Japan has very poor demographics, even though they have a large population. The Japanese are not a lightly populated nation. They do have a problem with a falling birth rate. But again, according to some commentators, perhaps in the future when more and more work is automated, one of the possibilities is that the only or one of the very good opportunities for human beings to get work would be in a Japanese military, and a high-tech military would reduce the number of personnel it requires and increase its high-tech. So from in terms of the military, this is not so much of a problem. It might be a slight issue when it comes to the economy. It already seems to be in certain sectors that Japan is facing this economic crunch. However, these are problems that Japan could possibly overcome if it needed to. So when it comes to capability, we have to give Japan a 2 out of 2. Now let's look at the context. Japan, again, though it lives amongst one of the most stable areas on the planet, does face deep geopolitical cleavages around its position, its rivalry with China, its issues from the past with Korea, its enmity with North Korea, its being part of the American sphere while lying right next to Russia. So Japan does face many, many tensions from its geopolitical position. And there are definitely opportunities to expand. There are many countries within that area and beyond, within Southeast Asia, even further away, Australia, India. There are nations that are very eager for Japanese help, whether developing their economy or their military or in any other field. There are many cultural exchanges. The Japanese are well respected throughout Southeast Asia, throughout much of other Asia, where they are looked at as this prototype for how to develop your country to become a leading nation in the world. And so, within the context, the Japanese do have the opportunity to expand their influence, to expand even their physical area, and to act as force multipliers around their region. And so, again, within the context sphere, we have to give Japan 2 out of 2. Now we come to motivation. Do the Japanese really have a motivation to expand? And truth be told, this might be a little more complicated, because the Japanese seem pretty satisfied with the status quo. However, the status quo unfortunately seems not to be in a very good position. So the status quo might not last, but till as long as it does, I think the Japanese people, Japanese society, Japanese polity doesn't want to, how should we put this, rock the boat. It wants to stay on an even keel. It wants to maintain its position as one of the largest economies in the world, one of the highest developed nations in the world, and live a prosperous and peaceful life. But however, if it does need to in the future, I think the Japanese people would be highly motivated to maintain their nation's position by whatever means necessary. So in the motivation department, we'll have to give Japan, let's say, a 1 out of 2. Now this brings us to the X factor. So in the X factor in Japan, it's very interesting because the Japanese are an incredibly disciplined society. They are quite homogeneous. There are no big ethnic tensions. There are no big religious tensions. They are quite a structured society. They're a highly disciplined society, very organized, and they are willing to work within the structure that they have created, and they're willing to work hard. Usually, nations and societies cannot make sharp U-turns in policy or in attitude. You know, it tends to tear nations apart. Think of the Soviet Union, how it collapsed when Gorbachev started taking a turn away from what was the usual path. Japan, on the other hand, historically as well, has been able to make these U-turns quite efficiently. Think of the Meiji Restoration. Think of the complete change of society and structure after the Second World War that led to the Japanese economic miracle. So this X factor, I think, works very well for Japan in the context of it being a future superpower, and we'll have to give it a +1 in this. So that gives Japan a total of 6 points out of 7. Well, these were 4 countries that you didn't expect to be global superpowers that we spoke about in the near future. Again, like I said in the beginning of the video, nobody can predict the future, but we feel that these are 4 countries that would be good to watch in terms of what they might achieve in the future. Do let us know if you'd like us to do more videos like this in 2026. We could also do some videos on 4 countries that should have been superpowers and are not. Please let us know in the comments what you'd like to see. And do like and subscribe. The algorithm really depends on that. Press that bell icon and we'll see you next time. Thank you.